So here I've got a most interesting article that was published in the end of September. And it's Microsoft doing a Linux install tutorial. Now they give you a few different options and methods on how to do it, but they still go through and even do a bare bones install. So you've got your install method, you pick it, choose your distro, and then follow the steps for your preferred install. So what you could use the Windows subsystem for Linux, a Linux virtual machine in the cloud, Linux virtual machine on your local machine, or a bootable USB to install on bare metal. And then they cover some of the basic post-install stuff that you're going to need to do. So this is really interesting to me because we all know that Microsoft loves Linux now. And we swear that Linux is not a virus that attaches itself to anything and that it needs to be eradicated. So this is not embrace, extend, extinguish. I swear. So let's see. Windows subsystem for Linux available to those with a Windows machine is the most simple way to install Linux. So all you're going to do in a PowerShell is run wsl -- install. And it'll basically install Ubuntu on the base one. So Windows terminal, obviously really weird. I think feels like it runs on Electron with how much resources it takes up. And I mean, I've used Hyper forever ago, and yeah, I don't think I like the idea of having Electron as the display or the graphical side of my terminal emulator. But anyway, so yeah, there were a couple more options in here. Like you can put in a distro that's available after install, and it'll install that specific distro. And I think that's later on in the article, but so then you've got create a virtual machine available to everyone regardless if you're using a Windows or Mac OS based machine, but will require an Azure account if creating a virtual VM in the cloud or virtualization software, if creating a VM directly on your machine. VM is a digital version of physical computer and is the popular option, blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of people know what a VM is, I would hope. It's a little, system that simulates another system on your system, and you can do GPU pass-through with it and whatnot. Like WSL, you can create VM instances of many different Linux distributions as you like, running them in an isolated environment, free from any conflicts, and great for software development testing. While running a Linux distribution, WSL has slightly faster performance. Linux VM is easier to clone or migrate. Okay, this might be true, but I don't know. You're probably better doing bare bones, but anyway. You can create a virtual machine on a cloud service like Azure or on your local machine using virtualization software, otherwise known as a hypervisor. KVM if you're running a Linux box. Let's see, creating a VM on Azure means it's hosted on the cloud on Microsoft servers. Let's see, you're renting the resources. And then see, creating a VM on your local machine requires virtualization using hypervisor, so Windows includes a Type 1 hypervisor called Hyper-V to run virtualization directly on your device hardware. There are also Type 2 hypervisors that run on top of the operating system like VirtualBox or VMware. If you are using a Mac, the most commonly recommended hypervisor is Parallels Desktop. Though this is a paid service, blah, 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 blah. So VirtualBox or VMware are basically your Windows ones, but Linux comes with KVM, which provides the hypervisor system, and it's pretty much in every Linux install for the most part, in most of them. And then on top of that, you can use something like QEMU to and to run your virtual machine, or use some other virtualization manager to do it as well. But you do have the VirtualBox option, and with that you could tweak the Linux kernel to run to make it think that it's running on bare hardware. So you've got a little bit more options in how you're tweaking like certain programs that are typically in that type 2 hypervisor category on Linux than on Windows. You're responsible for managing the virtual machine when using a hypervisor. Yeah, of course, because it's right there on your machine. So you have to make sure it's up to date. You have to make sure it's secure, that it's like networked and NATed properly and everything. So this is the Azure interface apparently, but yeah, open in Edge for some reason. Bare metal Linux means that Linux is running directly on the device hardware. This install method requires you to create a bootable USB. Yeah, how many people, by raise of hands, have ever created a bootable USB for their Linux install? Okay, many users choose the traditional method of installing bare metal on a Linux device that is also running Windows and using the dual boot method, which is halfway what I'm doing, but they're on separate SSDs now rather than on the same drive and partitioned out separately. Let's see, do they even manage that? You need to partition your hard drive to create separate spaces. People use hard drives still? I've got everything on my SSDs except for my WD Black 5 terabyte hard drive that I am using for backing up this system on for my reinstall probably later on today. Bare metal, let's see, has become so close that few developers... Wait, the performance between WSL virtual machines and bare metal Linux has become so close that few developers choose this method due to the overhead of needing to restart or reboot your device anytime you want to switch between the operating systems. Okay, so from what I've heard too, I don't know if WSL has improved since then, but people still preferred many developers still preferred to develop mainly from Linux than from Windows. So, and beyond that, you can generally find another machine to test stuff on Windows. So it kind of like mitigates some of that rebooting. Let's see, you can find popular Linux distributions available to download on linux.org. Once you've chosen your distro, follow the instructions to create a bootable USB to install bare metal Linux. Okay. So those are the methods that they go over. They kind of give like an overview of the steps, pretty much. Like, I could follow it, but then again, I've done it like 10 million times. So yeah, these are what linux.org has. Let's see, Bodhi, Netrunner, Kali, Neptune, Yarrow, Bunsen Labs, Mageia, PureOS. Oh, that's Purisms, I believe. Yeah, Ubuntu's right there. I wonder if... I'm not going to say that. So yeah, anybody that's done this already, I guess for like those that are completely new to it, this is really helpful. Like, there are people that I've come across in school that they may be heavy gamers, but their parent put together the computer for them and set a lot of it up. So doing like this bootable USB thing was completely foreign to them. They'd never done this before. And so a tutorial like this might go over the basics. I've only like skimmed over it barely, but we'll get deeper into that. Let's see, different versions of Linux are called distributions, sometimes shortened to distros. Well, distros all the time. Anyway, there isn't actually a way to just install Linux. First, you need to choose which distribution that uses the Linux kernel you want to download and install. Unless you get System 76, then they have their laptops with Pop! OS pre-installed. And then you can rip and roar from there. Or if you get like a Pinebook, which I believe come with Manjaro pre-installed and things like that. Let's see. May want to start with Ubuntu. I mean, yeah, kind of. Mint might be a better choice at this point. Let's see. Common starting place. Yes, this was my starting place for most Linux users. Ubuntu offers desktop and server version depending on how you plan to use it. Let's see. Operating systems will be responsible for may help determine which distribution to use. Arch Linux is popular for those who want a highly customizable do-it-yourself approach that is still stable and well supported by a large user base. Okay, so it says it's much more complicated to start, but can help you to better understand how Linux works due to the amount of custom configuration. So yeah, there's a lot of custom configuration. As you start diving deeper into the rabbit hole, obviously, like, you start to mess with Ubuntu, like, that's what I did for a little bit, like, themes and stuff, and then, like, it got more deeper and deeper into it. Then I found Bridge Linux later on down the road, and that kind of, like, was my gateway into Arch and Arch-based distros. So there's that, and I believe Arch also has an easy-to-go installer, an easier-to-use installer than it did before. So you still have much of the same power user configuration, but you don't have to do as much of the manual, like, typing everything out, because there's a script to help you with that now. A minimal or lightweight distribution means a small footprint with low memory. Let's see, speed requirements. Alpine Linux is a popular option where users will find most features disabled or not installed by default. So Alpine Linux obviously has the base bare bones, but it still has some graphical things to it. It's running BusyBox rather than the GNU core utils, so it lets you. So you've got obviously a lighter footprint, and it's much smaller, and in some ways it's more secure because it's not got some of the other stuff that crept in feature-wise from the GNU core utils and some other such things. Let's see, Kali for penetration testing, security, and whatnot. They do not mention Parrot OS, but it was also not on the distro page there. So, I mean, Parrot OS is another good one, and they've got specific tooling for. They've got a specific spin of Parrot for, like, their Hack the Box courses as well. Let's see. But still has everything you need for a containerized app. So yeah, you can still run Flatpaks on it, or Docker. So then you've got your business and enterprise, which is CentOS generally, or Red Hat and Oracle. CentOS. OpenSUSE is also opening into that market to, like, replace Arhel, and that's its own bag of beans. But it's interesting because I think OpenSUSE has been running their own systems on OpenSUSE, and OpenSUSE has that live kernel patching, so you can, like, patch the kernel while the system's still running without needing to reboot. So it's got a lot more, like, server implementation stuff for continuous uptime, hence the uptime funk. So let's see, community support, larger community that consistently contributes to the distro, fixing bugs, blah, blah, blah. Yes, having a large community that you can go to ask questions is very helpful, particularly when you're first getting into it. So that's where Ubuntu may be easier to deal with, the community there, or any of the Ubuntu-based distros, maybe Debian, but Arch can sometimes be a little interesting. I don't know how much it's changed on the Arch forums, but yeah, they can. Some people say that they can be derogatory in some ways to new users and the way that they do things wrong. So yeah, the all-important points to take into account. So Linux Mint might be better than Ubuntu, honestly, and it has a few more tools to ease the transition into Linux, like its own driver manager, which Manjaro steals as well. So Mint might be easier to go into because of all the tools it has to facilitate installing drivers, getting your system set up, and also making it easier to run it. And I believe they've even got a Debian-based spin as well. So yeah. So yeah, they've got, yeah, see? They've got advertising the gaming stuff too. So you've got Linux Mint 21 and then Linux Mint Debian Edition. Let's see. See, yeah, it's just the backend. So there's that option too. So you have less of that like Ubuntu middleman in between, and you're probably getting more up-to-date packages while also keeping it stable. So there's that. So now your install method, depending on what you pick. So you've got, let's see, PowerShell or command prompt, PowerShell. Let's see, to lit wsl install, we went over that, and then restart your machine. And then you can check which ones are list online. So yeah, so list online will tell you what ones you can install and the name to use for it when you're installing it. So they've got Ubuntu Debian Kali, interesting. OpenSUSE, SUSE Enterprise, and then other Ubuntus. So I would probably go with Debian. Maybe Kali, debating. Because I'm not sure how useful Kali would really be in WSL. So then you can go install D distro name. So that's the full one. It's D distro name. So that would probably be this part right here. So I thought there was Arch for a little bit, but apparently not. Maybe. When did... I don't have a timestamp on this. Darn it. Okay, creating a virtual machine in the cloud. See, to create a virtual machine that is hosted in the cloud on Azure, log into the Azure portal, select the Create a Virtual Machine service. Then follow the instructions. So fill out the form. If you don't have an Azure subscription, create a free account before you log in, creating Linux VMs with Azure, blah, blah, blah. So basically it's fill out a form and then it rips and roars. So then creating with a hypervisor, you'll need to check the hardware requirements for your chosen hypervisor. So they've got the Windows Hyper-V, getting started with it. So they're those. So they link to other resources rather than going over like how to like set up the hypervisor specifically, which makes sense. It's like, okay, click here, but it's kind of inconvenient to have to click through like 10 different links in order to get there. So then we've got the VMware one, which they link directly to the procedure for picking everything and deciding how things go. And then VirtualBox, they just link to... Yeah. Well, that's funny. Can't you link to the PDF, maybe? Look, here's the user manual. They could have done that a little bit better for VirtualBox, but... Okay. Creating your first virtual machine. So you go through that, and then you go through that, and then you go through that, and then you go through that. And then there's the summary screen. And yeah. So VirtualBox has is free, which you can take advantage of. I think VMware, I don't remember if they're free or not, but I could care less. Let's see, so you need to check the hardware requirements for your hypervisor. Once it's enabled or installed, you'll need to choose the type of OS you want to install and source from that. If you're new to hypervisors and want to learn more, try the free online training module. So at Microsoft, yeah, Microsoft Learn. So virtual machines or hypervisors are, if you've used them enough, I've used them to like literally play StarCraft in. I had like one dedicated for installing StarCraft, like running StarCraft. And then what was it? Then early on in my Linux journey, I had a virtual machine that I would run to, what would I run in there? I had to run a couple games in there on an XP virtual machine. And VirtualBox has the seamless mode, seamless mode basically, where it'll make your wallpaper transparent and then stretch it to like the full screen of the desktop you're working with as much as it can. And then so you've got the Windows taskbar and start bar above, whatever, at the bottom of your screen or at the top, however it works, right next to your other panels on the screen. So that was really cool to work with and have it decently seamless between the two. So you could have the Windows overlaid on top of the Linux ones. But then it got kind of weird with the layering once you like selected a Linux window, because then it would pop everything over the virtual machine, which makes sense because it's all in this. The virtual machine is one layer basically. But there's that. VirtualBox has a few good features for that and decent integration that I use to play certain games, and then later on I was able to figure things out down the road as I got deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. So let's see, if you want a bare metal Linux, whether to run a distribution alone or on a device or to dual boot the distribution with Windows, here are the steps. Download the image. Create a bootable USB drive. Typically need a USB drive with at least 16 gigs of space. You also need software to create the bootable drive. There are many options such as Balena Etcher, Rufus, a UNet boot, and etc. Often the download site for your chosen Linux distribution will recommend which startup disk creator software to use. So yeah, pretty simple. I think my personal favorite is DD, but anyway. Boot your device from the USB drive. Select install options. Depending on your distro, it may be more manual than others. If you're installing Gentoo, you're going to boot up to a command line, and you're going to have to like have fun running things through on your own. And you can enable disk encryption if you want to. And then, unlike what Windows does, it asks you to create a username and password during the install, so that if you're using a graphical one, so that it can set all that up for you and you can boot right in and just get ripping and roaring, rather than waiting 10-20 minutes for it to log you in, create your desktop, and then still install more updates. And then you've got the also try option, which runs a live environment of the full desktop that you will be booting into it first. So that gives you a really, really good way to test it out without actually installing it. So USB drive like install is pretty basic, and it runs pretty quickly as well. So after installing Linux, so get familiar with the preferred package manager chosen by your chosen distro. Linux uses package managers to download and update any software that you plan to use. It's a really convenient way to keep your system up to date, believe it or not. And like 90% of your software is going to come from your repos that you install. So everything updates all at once, rather than having to do a Windows update that updates Windows systems files, and then having to go and do like an application update for your Office software because it's installed separately, and then having to go over here and update your drivers separately from that. It's all together for the most part. Let's see, use your distributions package manager to update and upgrade your distribution. Let's see, software packages in a stable release of a distro are often outdated. It is recommended to regularly run an update. So it depends on when they last. You can see a timestamp on particularly the rolling release distros on when they last updated that stuff. And conveniently enough, generally the installer will give you the option to connect to Wi-Fi, and it will actually update the packages or install the most up-to-date packages in the process of the install so that you don't have to do that later on down the road. So it happens all at once rather than you having to install like 20 H2 and then having to go through Windows Update to do 22 H2 and then wait for 5 hours while you process 30 laptops that way, because Microsoft just really knows how to manage things that well. Learn about the Linux resources available at Microsoft, such as Linux-specific versions of Microsoft tools like Visual Studio Code, .NET, and PowerShell. Free Linux-related training courses available from the Learning Catalog. It's really funny that they're embracing Linux this hard, and it's like, okay, does this mean Windows is transitioning to a Linux distro? Because it's like, now you're saying, like, here, install this. It's like, is Windows Core OS just a Linux distro underneath it all with like, so the NT kernel is pretty, I guess, modular and plug and play for some things, but it's still like the Linux kernel in WSL has to hook into the NT kernel because of that. So I don't know, we may see Microsoft going down the Linux rabbit hole, but due to the nature of open source and free software, it'll be hard for Microsoft to actually kill Linux because there will be someone that will be able to fork it and remove all of Microsoft's cruft, just like you see with Chromium and Google. If you enjoyed the video, then like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm, boost the video up, share this video with your friends. If you found it informative or you just want to chat, I've got plenty of places in the description, Discord, Guilded, and what have you. Check those out, and I will see you guys in the next one.